The words pierced through me like a blade. Rot in that poor house, old woman. My son, my only son, stood on my front porch, his face red with anger I couldn't understand. His voice was loud enough to startle the neighbor's dog across the street. I remember clutching the wooden doorframe for balance, my palms sweaty, my heart pounding. At 66 years old, I had endured loss, sickness, poverty, and widowhood, but I had never thought I'd endure this, betrayal by the very child I had raised with my own blood and tears. Ethan's wife, Delilah, stood a few steps behind him. She was tall and beautiful, her dark hair pinned neatly, her perfume so strong it stung my nose. In her hands, she carried 2 designer suitcases. She wore a silk blouse I had once seen advertised in a Macy's catalog, the kind I would never have dreamed of affording. On her face was a smirk, cold and satisfied, like a queen watching her soldiers win a battle. And standing beside her, clutching a teddy bear and blinking up at me with innocent eyes, was little Jacob. My grandson. My sweet boy with the round cheeks I had kissed 1,000 times. My heart broke when he looked at me like he didn't understand what was happening, like he couldn't decide if I was family or just another old woman in the way. Ethan, I whispered, barely able to breathe, please don't do this. This is your home. It will always be your home. Don't turn your back on me. He didn't flinch, didn't soften, didn't even hesitate. He grabbed the handle of Delilah's suitcase, muttered something under his breath about finally living like real adults, and marched down the porch steps. The slam of the car doors echoed down the quiet street. The engine roared to life, the headlights blinded me for a moment, and then the car rolled down my gravel driveway. Dust rose up, curling in the twilight like smoke from a dying fire. I stood frozen on that porch until the taillights disappeared completely. Silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. All I could hear was the creak of the porch boards under my slippers and the ticking clock inside the house that suddenly felt too big. I was 66 years old. A widow for nearly 10 years. A mother who had given every ounce of strength she had to raise her boy alone after his father died. I had worked long shifts at the grocery store, taken sewing jobs on weekends, skipped meals to pay the mortgage. I had endured the loneliness of cold winters, the humiliation of being called poor by women at church, the endless bills piling on the kitchen table. And through it all, I had one hope, that Ethan would remember. That my son would grow into a man who understood sacrifice. That he would stand by me, the way I had always stood by him. But in that moment, as the night swallowed their car, I realized I had been left behind. My knees buckled. I gripped the porch rail to keep from collapsing. I thought about the hundreds of times I had waited by that same door for him. Waiting for his school bus, waiting for him to come home from football practice, waiting for him to return from college on holidays. And now, for the first time, I knew he wasn't coming back. Inside the house, the kitchen light hummed, flickering slightly. The walls smelled faintly of cinnamon from the pie I had baked earlier, thinking Ethan and his family might stay for dinner. On the table, 3 plates sat untouched. I had set them out carefully, one for Ethan, one for Delilah, one for Jacob. My own plate sat off to the side, smaller, plain. I had imagined us sitting together, laughing the way we used to, sharing stories. Instead, the chairs sat empty. The food went cold. I sank into my chair and buried my face in my hands. Rot in that poor house. The words repeated in my head like a curse. To him, this home wasn't warmth. It wasn't sacrifice. It wasn't love. It was nothing but a poor house. A shack compared to the mansion his mother-in-law had promised. I pictured that house up on the hill, the one Delilah's family owned. Columns at the front, polished floors, chandeliers glowing like stars. I imagined Ethan and Delilah walking through those doors, greeted with champagne and expensive smiles. My chest ached so badly I thought my heart might stop. I remembered the night his father died, how I had held Ethan close, whispering promises that I would never let him down. How I had told him, through tears, that family was everything. And now, standing in the shadow of his wife's wealth, he had forgotten me. The phone rang suddenly, making me jump. I wiped my face with the edge of my sweater and picked it up. It was my neighbor, Gloria, from across the street. "Martha," she said gently, "are you all right? I saw Ethan drive off in a hurry." My throat tightened. I didn't want pity. I didn't want anyone to know. I'm fine, I lied. Just tired. Long day. She hesitated, then said, "You know you can come by any time. You're not alone." But I was alone. And I knew it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered from room to room, staring at photographs on the walls. Ethan in his graduation gown. Ethan holding baby Jacob. Ethan smiling beside me on Christmas mornings. Each frame was a reminder that the boy I had raised no longer existed. In his place was a man who could look his own mother in the eyes and tell her to rot. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the creaks of the old house. The quiet reminded me of the nursing homes I had visited years ago when I volunteered at church. Empty halls. Forgotten people. I wondered if that was where I would end up, alone in a room that smelled of bleach, waiting for visitors who never came. The days that followed blurred together. I ate very little. I walked to the mailbox slower than usual, half expecting a letter, though none ever came. Sometimes I thought I heard Ethan's voice on the porch, but when I opened the door, there was nothing but wind. Every corner of the house reminded me of absence. The rocking chair where Jacob had once curled into my lap, listening to bedtime stories. The hallway where Ethan had practiced his guitar as a teenager. The patch of garden I had planted with roses in memory of my husband. All of it was filled with ghosts. And yet, a small part of me refused to believe it was over. Deep down, something told me this story wasn't finished. Life has a way of circling back. The proud fall. The forgotten rise. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Ethan and Delilah would see the truth one day. They would learn that money doesn't buy loyalty, and comfort doesn't replace love. And when that day came, they would come back. I thought about what I would do if it happened. Would I slam the door in their faces, the way Ethan had slammed his car door on me? Would I let bitterness eat me alive? Or would I do something else? Something so unexpected that even strangers on the street would be left speechless? 1 month later, I got my answer. On a rainy evening, just as the sky turned dark and thunder rolled over the city, I heard a knock on my door. Not the casual knock of a neighbor, but the desperate pounding of someone with nowhere else to go. When I opened the door, I froze. There they were. Ethan, Delilah, and little Jacob. Their clothes were wrinkled, their eyes hollow. Behind them sat a taxicab, the driver leaning against the car with a look of curiosity and impatience. At their feet were suitcases, those same shiny, expensive suitcases that had once been carried with pride. Now, they looked heavy. Defeated. "Mama." Ethan's voice cracked. We have nowhere else to go." The driver raised an eyebrow, clearly waiting for me to either slam the door or let them in. And in that moment, I made a choice that shocked them all. So shocking that even the taxi driver whispered under his breath, "Well, I'll be damned." What I did next changed everything. When I stood at that doorway, staring at my son's defeated face and the suitcases at his feet, 1,000 memories rushed back to me like a flood. Memories that burned, memories that soothed, memories that reminded me of who I was long before the words "rot in that poor house" ever cut my soul. I wasn't always alone. I wasn't always the old woman people passed by without seeing. Once, I was a young wife with dreams bigger than my bank account. My husband, Harold, and I built this house with our own hands. We painted the walls ourselves, scraping our knuckles on ladders, laughing when paint dripped into our hair. He was strong, steady, the kind of man whose silence was more comforting than a crowd's chatter. But Harold was taken too soon. A heart attack at 53 left me widowed, standing in a hospital hallway with paperwork in my hand, and Ethan, our 15-year-old boy, clinging to my arm, his tears soaking my sleeve. That night, as I sat on the edge of our bed staring at the empty space where my husband should have been, I made a promise. A promise whispered into the darkness: "I'll give everything I have to this boy. Everything." And I did. I took a cashier job at the local grocery store. Long hours on my feet, counting nickels to buy ground beef and rice. I remember my hands aching from bagging groceries, the sting of customers looking past me like I wasn't human. When Ethan needed new shoes for basketball, I patched together old pairs for myself so he could run across the court with pride. When he wanted to join the school trip to Washington, D.C., I worked extra sewing jobs, hemming dresses and patching jeans for neighbors, my fingers raw from the needle, just so he wouldn't feel left out. Every penny I earned went to Ethan. Every dream I had shrank so his could grow. But somewhere along the way, he began to forget. At first, it was small things, rolling his eyes when I packed him a lunch, complaining about the off-brand cereal I bought. Then it became bigger, slamming doors when I asked him to help mow the lawn, snapping at me when I reminded him of Harold's values. "Stop living in the past, Mom," he'd say. "This isn't Dad's world anymore." I brushed it off, telling myself it was teenage rebellion. All kids talk back, I thought. He'll outgrow it. But then Delilah appeared. She wasn't like the girls Ethan had dated before. Sweet, simple, working-class girls who reminded me of myself when I was young. Delilah was different. She came from a family with money, the kind of money that spoke in cars with leather seats and kitchens with marble countertops. I'll never forget the first time Ethan brought her home. She walked into my little house, her heels clicking on the worn linoleum, her manicured nails brushing against my faded wallpaper. She didn't say a word, but her eyes said everything. "This place is beneath me." Ethan adored her. I saw it instantly. He sat straighter when she spoke, laughed louder when she teased him, glanced at her as if her approval was the only sunlight he needed. I wanted to be happy for him. I wanted to believe she loved him for who he was, not for what he could become under her family's wing. But a mother knows. A mother always knows. One evening, as I washed dishes, I overheard her whispering to him on the porch. "Ethan, you can't live like this forever. Your mom's house is... well, it's embarrassing. My parents can help us. They want us to move in with them. They can give us a real start." I stood there, hands trembling in the soapy water, pretending not to hear. My heart screamed to run outside and fight for my son, to remind him of every sacrifice I had made, every meal I had skipped, every hour I had worked until my back gave out. But I stayed quiet. I didn't want to be the bitter mother who drove him away. And maybe that was my mistake. Because slowly, Ethan began to change. He stopped thanking me for dinners. He started comparing me to Delilah's family. "They have a pool, Mom. Their house has 6 bedrooms. You should see the kitchen. They've got 2 ovens. 2. Do you know how amazing that is?" I smiled, nodded, pretended to be happy for him. But inside, I felt myself shrinking. I could feel the distance growing between us, like a rope slipping through my hands, no matter how tightly I tried to hold on. When he finally married her, I stood in the church pew, clutching a handkerchief, praying that maybe love would soften Delilah's edges, that maybe she'd learn to see me not as a poor old woman but as family. But at the reception, I watched her laugh with her parents while Ethan clung to her side, and I knew. I was no longer the center of his world. Still, I endured. I endured the polite smiles, the missed phone calls, the birthdays celebrated in other people's houses. I endured until that night on my porch, when Ethan finally let his wife's words pour out of his own mouth. "Rot in that poor house, old woman." That was when my endurance broke. And yet, as I stood facing him now, with rain dripping from his hair and Jacob clutching his leg, I remembered all of it. I remembered who Ethan used to be. The little boy who cried when his father died. The teenager who once hugged me after winning his first basketball game. The young man who had once promised, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you someday." I wanted to ask him, what happened to that boy? Where did he go? But instead, I bit my tongue. I stayed silent. Because I knew the story wasn't over. Something had gone wrong in that mansion on the hill. Something had shattered the illusion of wealth and comfort. I didn't know what yet, but I knew enough to see it in their faces. Ethan's pride had cracked. Delilah's smugness had withered. Even the taxi driver, leaning against his car in the rain, looked more dignified than they did standing on my porch. And though my heart ached with betrayal, another feeling crept in. A quiet, almost dangerous strength. 4 years, I had been the one abandoned, forgotten, underestimated. But now? Now the balance was shifting. What had driven my son back to me with his suitcases in the rain? What storm had torn down the walls of that golden mansion? I stepped aside, opening the door wide. "Come in," I said softly. Ethan looked at me with disbelief. Delilah's jaw dropped. Even the taxi driver muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." And as they crossed the threshold into the very house they had once despised, I knew, the story of sacrifice was only the beginning. Now came the story of reckoning. The rain dripped from Ethan's collar as he stepped into the house, his shoes leaving muddy streaks on the floor I had polished just that morning. Delilah followed, shivering despite her designer coat, her mascara running slightly from the storm outside. Jacob clung to her hip, his small arms wrapped tightly around her neck, his teddy bear pressed between them. The air was thick, silent but charged, like the moments before thunder cracks. I didn't ask questions. Not yet. Instead, I motioned for them to sit at the kitchen table, the same table where they had once refused to eat my food. Ethan sank into a chair, rubbing his forehead with both hands. Delilah hovered near him, her chin lifted, still trying to wear her pride like armor, though the edges were fraying. I set a kettle on the stove. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if every gesture were an anchor to keep me from drowning in old anger. As the water heated, the steam began to fog the window, blurring the view of the dark street beyond. Finally, I broke the silence. "So," I said softly, "what happened?" Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "You were right, Mom. You were right about everything." My heart tightened. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the details, but I had waited years for him to admit those words. Delilah stiffened, her eyes flashing. "Don't start, Ethan," she snapped. "This isn't about your mother being right. This is about your mother's house being the only place left." Her words stung, but I kept my face calm. I poured tea into mismatched mugs, sliding one in front of each of them. Ethan leaned back in the chair, his eyes hollow. "It all fell apart, Mom. Everything. Living in her mother's mansion. It wasn't what I thought it would be." I closed my eyes briefly, picturing it: chandeliers, velvet curtains, a driveway long enough to hide 3 cars. I had imagined Ethan and Delilah walking those polished halls, smiling, laughing, wrapped in a life I could never compete with. And now? Now that dream had turned into a nightmare. Delilah's voice cut through my thoughts. "My mother welcomed us, yes. But she never let us forget whose house it was. Every dinner, she'd remind Ethan that she was the one feeding us. Every time Jacob made a mess, she'd sneer about how things were cleaner before we moved in. And when Ethan lost his job..." Her voice faltered. Ethan stared down at his mug. I blinked. "Lost your job?" He nodded slowly, shame burning on his cheeks. "They downsized at the firm. Cutbacks. I thought it was temporary. I thought I'd find something quick." But weeks went by, then months. And Delilah's mother, well, she made it clear that I was nothing but a burden. A grown man living under her roof, eating her food, unemployed. The words hit me like cold water. This was the son who had once sneered at my modest home. The son who had looked at me with disdain because I lived on a pension and social security. And now he was the one being looked down on, the one being reminded daily that he was less than enough. Delilah's lips trembled as she continued. "And then, she asked us to leave. She said we were dead weight. She said her home wasn't a shelter for failures." The kettle whistled sharply, and I removed it from the stove, my hands shaking. My son and his wife had been cast out of the very palace they abandoned me for. Jacob, sensing the tension, whispered softly, "Grandma." His voice was small, uncertain, but it sliced through the heaviness like sunlight through storm clouds. He looked at me with wide eyes, searching for comfort. My heart swelled. I bent down and smoothed his damp hair. "You're safe here, sweetheart," I whispered. Ethan finally lifted his gaze to me, his eyes red. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was blind. I thought Delilah's family could give us everything you couldn't. But I see now. I see what I left behind." The words should have healed me. But instead, they cut deeper. Because apologies, no matter how sincere, cannot erase wounds. They cannot rewind the nights I cried alone, the meals I ate in silence, the echo of his cruel words. I sipped my tea and stared at him across the table. For a moment, no one spoke. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, filling the space with reminders of every second I had lived in loneliness. Delilah shifted in her seat. "So what now?" she demanded. "Are we just supposed to live here? In this little house?" Her tone was sharp, but underneath it, I heard fear. She was clinging to whatever pride she had left, but her safety net had vanished. I folded my hands. "This house may be little," I said, my voice steady, "but it's built on love. And it's stronger than any mansion without it." Ethan lowered his head, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. The storm outside pounded harder, rattling the windows. The taxi driver honked once, impatient, then drove off into the night, leaving them with me. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. The tables had turned. For the first time, Ethan and Delilah needed me more than I needed them. But I wasn't going to rush to forgive. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't something handed out like candy. It's earned, through humility and change. Still, as I looked at Jacob curled up in the chair, sipping warm tea with both hands like it was treasure, I knew I couldn't let bitterness be the only voice in this house. I stood. "You can stay," I said. "But there will be rules." Delilah's head jerked up. "Rules?" "Yes." My voice was calm, but firm. "This isn't your mother's mansion. This isn't a place where you look down on people. This is my home. And if you're under my roof, you'll respect it. You'll work for it. You'll earn your keep." Ethan nodded instantly. "Yes, Mom. Anything. I'll do anything." Delilah hesitated, her jaw tightening. But when Jacob yawned and rested his head on her shoulder, she finally whispered, "Fine." I turned to the hallway closet, pulling out blankets and pillows. My body ached with the weight of age, but my spirit felt stronger than it had in years. I wasn't just an old woman left to rot. I was a mother. I was the foundation. I was the roof that hadn't collapsed even when storms raged. As I handed the blankets to my son, I looked into his tired eyes and thought, this is only the beginning. Because if Ethan thought living here would be simple, he was mistaken. This wasn't just a return home. This was a reckoning. And soon, he would learn that the same quiet strength that had built this house, that had raised him from nothing, could also teach him the hardest lesson of all, the true meaning of family. The rain eased outside, softening into a drizzle. But inside, the storm was only beginning. The first morning after they returned, I woke at dawn as I always do. Old habits never die. My bones ached as I stretched, the sound of rain still dripping from the gutters outside. I tied my worn robe around my waist, shuffled into the kitchen, and brewed a pot of coffee. The house smelled of warmth again, coffee, toast, and the faint lavender from the candle I lit each morning in Harold's memory. But the peace didn't last long. By 7 o'clock, I heard the shuffle of feet in the hallway. Ethan walked in first, his hair disheveled, wearing the same clothes he had on the night before. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and pale. A grown man, but in that moment, I saw the lost boy he once was. Behind him came Delilah. Her perfume entered the room before she did, clashing with the simple smell of breakfast. She sat at the table without so much as a good morning, her eyes scanning my kitchen like a critic reviewing a failed restaurant. Jacob followed quietly, clutching his bear, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Coffee's on the counter," I said, keeping my voice steady. Ethan nodded and poured himself a cup. Delilah, however, leaned back in her chair with her arms folded. "Do you have almond milk?" she asked. I turned to her slowly. "No. I have cow's milk. From the grocery store." She pursed her lips, as if the word grocery left a sour taste in her mouth. "Never mind," she muttered. I placed scrambled eggs, toast, and sausage on the table. Ethan began eating gratefully, but Delilah poked at her plate like it was an insult. That's when I decided the time had come. No more silence. No more being the background character in my own home. I set my mug down and looked at both of them. "If you're going to live here, there are rules." "My rules." Ethan froze, mid-bite. Delilah arched an eyebrow, clearly offended. "Rules?" she scoffed. "Yes." I folded my hands on the table. "This is not your mother's mansion. There is no maid, no gardener, no endless supply of money. In this house, we respect each other. We pull our weight. We clean up after ourselves. And we earn our keep. Delilah's eyes narrowed. Are you saying you expect us to work for you? I held her gaze. I'm saying you will contribute. This isn't a hotel. This isn't charity. This is family. And in this family, everyone does their part. Ethan's face flushed with shame. He nodded quickly. Of course, Mom. I'll find work. I cut him off gently. Finding work is good. But it's not enough. Starting today, you'll mow the lawn, fix the gutters, and take care of the yard. It's been too much for me these past years. Ethan swallowed hard, then nodded again. I turned to Delilah. And you, since you don't have a job either, you'll cook 2 meals a week. You'll do laundry. You'll clean the bathrooms. Jacob will help set the table. Her jaw dropped. Excuse me. You heard me, I said firmly. Everyone has a place in this house. Even Jacob. No one is above anyone else here. Delilah's face turned crimson. She opened her mouth, ready to unleash whatever venom she carried, but Ethan placed a hand on her arm. Delilah, he whispered, please. She bit her lip, glaring at me. This is ridiculous, she muttered. But she said no more. For the first time in years, I felt something shift. For so long, I had been dismissed as weak, as poor, as irrelevant. But now, in my own home, I was reclaiming my place. Later that day, I watched Ethan push the lawn mower across the overgrown grass, sweat dripping down his back. His hands, once soft from office work, began to blister. And though part of me ached to see my son labor like that, another part of me whispered, this is good. He needs this. Inside, Delilah slammed cupboards as she tried to cook pasta, clearly unused to doing anything without a chef or takeout. The sauce burned slightly, filling the kitchen with smoke. She cursed under her breath, waving a dish towel at the alarm. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. Jacob sat at the table, his small hands folding napkins carefully the way I showed him. He looked up at me shyly and whispered, Grandma, is this right? I smiled and kissed his forehead. Perfect. The days stretched into weeks, and slowly, the rhythm of my house began to change. Ethan fixed the leaky roof. Delilah scrubbed bathrooms, though she complained every time. Jacob began helping me in the garden, his laughter filling the yard like music I hadn't heard in years. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Especially with Delilah. One night, after Ethan and Jacob had gone to bed, I found her sitting at the table alone, a glass of wine in her hand. She stared at the wall as if it had personally offended her. Why do you hate me so much? She blurted suddenly when she noticed me. I raised an eyebrow. I don't hate you. Yes, you do, she snapped. You've judged me from the start. You think I stole your son. You think I poisoned him against you. I sat down across from her, folding my hands. Didn't you? Her lips trembled. She set the glass down, her knuckles white. Maybe I wanted him to have more. Is that so wrong? My mother raised me to believe we deserved the best. That love isn't enough if you're stuck in poverty. And where did that get you? I asked quietly. Her eyes filled with tears she fought to hide. Thrown out. Like garbage. My own mother said I was a failure. She said Ethan was dead weight, and I was stupid for marrying him. She said Jacob was just another mouth to feed. Her voice cracked. I leaned back, stunned. So that was the truth. Delilah hadn't just been spoiled by her mother, she had been broken by her. Shaped into a woman who believed wealth was the only ticket to worth, then discarded the moment she faltered. Delilah, I said softly, your mother was wrong. A house filled with chandeliers isn't a home if there's no love in it. Family isn't measured by the size of the rooms, but by the hearts inside them. She wiped her eyes angrily. You make it sound so simple. Because it is, I replied. But simple doesn't mean easy. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just stared at me, her mask slipping, revealing the wounded girl beneath. That night, as I climbed into bed, I thought about the strange turn life had taken. My son, once proud and arrogant, was sweating in the yard to keep a roof over his head. My daughter-in-law, once smug and untouchable, was scrubbing toilets and crying into cheap wine. And my grandson, innocent and sweet, was learning what family really looked like. And me? I was no longer the forgotten woman left to rot. I was the teacher, the anchor, the quiet storm. But I also knew this peace was fragile. Secrets still lurked in the shadows. Delilah's resentment was not gone. It was only softened by exhaustion. Ethan's shame still weighed heavily, and pride has a way of clawing back when you least expect it. The story wasn't over. It was only deepening. And somewhere deep inside, I had the unsettling feeling that the mansion on the hill hadn't finished casting its shadow over my little home. For a few weeks, life in my house moved with a rhythm I hadn't known in years. The mornings were noisy again, Jacob's laughter mixing with Ethan's heavy footsteps and Delilah's sharp sighs. The evenings carried the smell of home-cooked meals, though sometimes the rice was burnt or the chicken undercooked when Delilah tried her hand at it. Ethan worked hard in the yard, repairing things I had long ignored. It was almost enough to make me believe things were healing. But cracks have a way of showing up in walls you think are strong. And in my house, the cracks were loud. One Saturday morning, Ethan stood on the porch, his arms crossed, staring down the street as the neighbor's son drove off in a shiny new truck. I watched him from the kitchen window, coffee mug in my hands. His jaw clenched tighter with each passing second. When he came back inside, he didn't greet me. He slammed the fridge door, grabbed a carton of milk and muttered, "I should be driving something like that. I should have been the one giving my family more." I set my mug down. "Ethan, you have a roof over your head. That's more than many can say." He scoffed. "A roof? Mom, this house is falling apart. The porch squeaks, the wiring's old, and the walls smell like mildew every time it rains. You call this enough?" I flinched, but before I could answer, Delilah chimed in from the living room, where she was scrolling on her phone. "He's right, Martha. I'm not saying your house isn't. Fine, but it's not where we belong. Jacob deserves more." Jacob, sitting cross-legged on the floor with crayons, looked up. "I like it here," he said softly. "Grandma lets me help in the garden." Delilah's face softened for a moment, but only a moment. She looked back at Ethan. "Your mother's house isn't forever. We need a plan." I felt the words sting like vinegar on a wound. Not forever. Not enough. Always lacking. I wanted to shout at them, to remind them that this poor house was the only thing keeping them from sleeping on the streets. But I bit my tongue. Instead, I stood and cleared the dishes, my silence louder than anger. Later that week, I felt the weight of the community pressing in. At church on Sunday, whispers followed us as we entered. "Is that Martha's boy? Didn't he move into the Clark's mansion?" Thought Delilah was too good for this side of town. Now look at them, back with his mama. Must have fallen hard. I kept my chin high, but inside, the shame ate at me. Not shame for myself. No, I had lived with too little for too long to feel ashamed of survival. But shame for Ethan. For Delilah. For the way pride had chewed them up and spit them out, and how the whole town now had a front-row seat to their fall. After the service, Gloria, my neighbor, pulled me aside. "Martha," she whispered, her eyes darting toward Ethan and Delilah. "What's going on? Why are they back here?" I forced a smile. "Families go through hard times, Gloria. That's all." But she saw through me. "Don't let them use you. You've given too much already." Her words echoed in my chest long after I went home. That night, as I folded laundry, I overheard Ethan and Delilah arguing in hushed voices in the next room. "You promised me things would be different," Delilah hissed. "I didn't know I'd lose my job." Ethan snapped back. "You should have fought harder. My mother was right, you can't provide." "And your mother?" Ethan's voice rose. "She threw us out like dogs." Silence. Then I heard the thud of something hitting the dresser. I pressed the folded shirt to my chest, closing my eyes. Jacob slept down the hall, his small breaths steady and innocent. He didn't deserve to live in a house filled with raised voices. The next day, I confronted Ethan in the yard. He was hammering a loose fence post, his movements harsh and angry. "You need to stop fighting in front of Jacob," I said firmly. He froze, the hammer mid-swing. "Stay out of it, Mom." "I won't," I said. "Not when my grandson is hearing things no child should hear." Ethan's face twisted. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think you're better than me just because you've survived longer." My hands trembled, but my voice stayed calm. "No, Ethan. I don't think I'm better. I think I know what survival takes. And it isn't pride. It isn't greed. It's family. It's humility. It's love." He dropped the hammer, his chest heaving. For a second, I thought he might yell. But instead he turned away, his shoulders slumping, and muttered, "Maybe I don't know how to be that kind of man." I wanted to reach for him, to pull him into my arms like when he was a boy. But I stayed rooted, because I knew the lesson wasn't mine to teach anymore. Life would teach it. Inside, Delilah began cleaning furiously, slamming drawers and scrubbing counters as if polishing the house would erase the humiliation she felt. That night, she cornered me in the kitchen. "You don't understand," she said, her eyes blazing. "I grew up believing I'd never struggle. My mother promised me security. And now I'm stuck here, cooking and cleaning in a house that smells like old wood. How am I supposed to accept this?" I met her glare. "By realizing that money doesn't define you. By teaching your son that worth isn't measured in marble countertops. By unlearning the lies your mother told you." Delilah laughed bitterly. "Unlearn? Do you know what it's like to hear your whole life that you're special, that you deserve the best? And then one day, you're scrubbing toilets in your mother-in-law's house because your husband can't hold a job." Her voice cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I hate this. I hate what I've become." For the first time, I didn't see her as the spoiled daughter-in-law who stole my son. I saw a broken woman, crushed under the weight of expectations she never asked for, repeating the cycle of cruelty her mother had inflicted. "Delilah," I whispered, "you're not defined by what you lost. You're defined by how you rise from it." She turned away, unable to answer. The days dragged, the cracks widening. Ethan grew restless, pacing the house, snapping at Jacob over small things. Delilah grew colder, her words sharper, her silence heavier. And Jacob, sweet Jacob, grew quieter. His drawings, once filled with bright colors, turned into dark scribbles of storm clouds and broken houses. One evening, after tucking him into bed, he whispered, "Grandma, are Mommy and Daddy gonna leave again?" The question gutted me. I kissed his forehead, smoothing his hair. "No, sweetheart," I lied. "You're safe here." But as I closed his door, I knew the truth. The cracks in my house weren't just in the walls. They were in the people inside it. And if we didn't face them soon, every fragile piece of peace I had rebuilt, would collapse again. And this time, I wasn't sure I'd survive the rubble. The storm didn't come with thunder or lightning. It came on a Wednesday night, quiet at first, the kind of night where the crickets sang outside and the air smelled faintly of rain. Jacob had gone to bed early, tired after school. I sat in my armchair, knitting a scarf, the rhythm of the needles steadying my nerves. Ethan sat at the table, scrolling through job listings on my old laptop. Delilah was pacing the kitchen, muttering under her breath, her heels tapping against the linoleum like tiny hammers. It was the sound of the laptop slamming shut that started it. "This is pointless," Ethan barked, shoving the computer away. "Nobody's hiring. Not for someone like me." Delilah's pacing stopped. She crossed her arms, her face hard. "Someone like you? You mean someone with a temper? Someone who quits every time life gets hard? Maybe they're smarter than I thought." Ethan's head snapped up. "Watch your mouth." "I'm tired of watching it," she snapped back. "I'm tired of pretending this is fine. We're living in your mother's crumbling house like beggars, and you're sitting there sulking instead of doing something." I froze, my needles slipping. The words stung, but I stayed silent. This was their fight, though every syllable landed in my chest like a stone. Ethan stood, his chair scraping loudly. "You think I wanted this? You think I dreamed of moving back here, dragging my family into the very place I swore I'd never end up. Delilah laughed bitterly. No, Ethan, I think you dreamed of being your own man. But look at you, back under your mama's roof, eating her food, sleeping in her house. Some man you turned out to be. His fists clenched. At least my mother loves me. At least she doesn't throw people out when they fail. Her eyes narrowed. Don't you dare bring my mother into this. She had every right to. To what? To kick her grandson out because she was embarrassed? To abandon us when we needed her most? She gave us everything. Delilah shouted, her voice breaking. And you lost it all. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. Ethan's chest heaved, Delilah's face was red with fury, and I sat frozen, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might give out. Then a small voice broke through. Stop yelling, Jacob whispered. We all turned. He stood in the hallway, clutching his teddy bear, his little eyes wide with tears. Please, he sobbed, stop fighting. I don't care if the house is small. I don't care if we don't have a big car. I just want us to be happy again. The room shattered. Delilah covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Ethan dropped his head into his hands. And me, my body trembled as I stood, my knees weak but my voice steady. That's enough, I said, louder than I had spoken in years. They both looked at me, stunned. You want to tear each other apart? Do it outside. Not in front of that boy. Not under my roof. I have swallowed my pride, opened my doors, and given you everything I have left, and I will not watch you poison this child with your bitterness. My words shook the air. Ethan whispered, Mom. No, I cut him off. You've both been blind. You chase what you lost, what you think you deserve, while forgetting what you already have. Look at Jacob. He doesn't care about marble floors or fancy cars. He cares about love. About peace. About his parents being kind to each other. And you're failing him. Tears ran down my cheeks. I hadn't planned to cry, but the weight of years, the loneliness, the betrayal, the silence, broke free. You think this house is small? It's not. It's big enough to hold a family, if that family knows how to love. You think it's old? Maybe. But it's strong enough to weather storms you can't even imagine. And you think I'm just an old woman? Maybe I am. But I have more strength in my bones than either of you are showing right now. The room was silent again, but not the heavy silence from before. This one hummed, sharp and raw. Delilah lowered her hands, tears streaking her face. I didn't mean to hurt him. Ethan stepped toward Jacob, kneeling down. His voice cracked. Buddy, I'm sorry. Daddy's sorry. Jacob clung to him, sobbing into his shirt. Delilah sank into a chair, covering her face. For the first time, she didn't look like the polished woman who had left me on the porch a month ago. She looked like a little girl, scared and lost. And Ethan, my son, my stubborn, prideful son, looked like a man finally seeing the truth. But forgiveness doesn't come all at once. The next day, whispers spread again in town. Someone must have overheard our shouting. Our walls were thin, and voices carried on summer nights. Gloria knocked on my door that afternoon with a casserole and a knowing look. You okay, Martha? She asked softly. I smiled weakly. Families fight. She studied me for a long time before saying, families also heal. But only if they want to. Her words lingered. That night, as I watched Ethan tuck Jacob into bed and Delilah quietly wash dishes, I knew the storm had changed something. Maybe not enough. Maybe not everything. But something. For the first time, Ethan lingered at the kitchen table after Jacob was asleep. He didn't say much, just fiddled with his hands and stared at the wood grain. Finally he whispered, Mom, do you ever think I'll get it right? I reached across the table, laying my wrinkled hand over his. You already have one thing right. You came home. That's a start. His eyes glistened, though he quickly blinked it away. But in Delilah's silence, in the way her shoulders hunched and her gaze dropped, I knew the battle wasn't over. The storm had passed, but the wreckage still lay scattered. And deep down, I feared another storm was brewing. One bigger, one that would decide if this family could truly survive under my roof. Because sometimes the worst battles aren't the ones fought in the open. They're the ones that simmer quietly, waiting for the right moment to explode again. And I had a feeling the next explosion would shake more than just my house. It would shake every life inside it. The morning sun poured through the thin curtains, painting stripes of light across my kitchen floor. For the first time in months, the house felt calm. Ethan was already outside, mowing the patchy yard with the old push mower he had once complained about. Jacob sat at the table, scribbling with crayons, humming to himself. And Delilah was leaning against the counter, her hair tied back, quietly slicing apples for breakfast. It wasn't perfect, but it was peace. Ethan had begun to change. Slowly, quietly, but undeniably. He had taken odd jobs around the neighborhood, fixing a leaky faucet for Mr. Daniels, hauling mulch for Gloria's garden, even cleaning gutters for the Smiths. It wasn't glamorous, but it was work. Honest work. And the pride on Jacob's face every time he announced, "Daddy fixed something today," was enough to soften the ache that had lived in my chest for too long. Still, I knew the cracks hadn't vanished. They were just hidden under fresh paint. One evening, after supper, Ethan lingered on the porch with me. He stared at the sunset, his hands calloused from work that had stained his palms with dirt and oil. "Mom," he said softly, "I didn't understand before. How you carried everything. The bills. The house. Me. I thought it was easy for you because you never complained. But I see now, it wasn't easy. You just chose to keep going." I swallowed hard. "That's what love does, Ethan. It keeps going, even when it hurts." He nodded, his jaw tight. "I want to be better. For Jacob. For Delilah. For you." It was the closest he had come to an apology. I let the moment sit, the sound of crickets filling the silence. But peace in this world never lasts. The knock came 3 days later. A sharp, impatient pounding that rattled the screen door. I knew before I even opened it. There she was. Margaret Clark. Delilah's mother. Tall, poised, and dressed in a tailored suit that looked out of place on my humble porch. Her perfume was so strong it drifted into my house before her voice did. "Delilah," she called, her eyes sweeping past me as if I were invisible. "Delilah, come out here this instant." Delilah froze in the hallway, the color draining from her face. Ethan stiffened, his shoulders squaring as if bracing for battle. Jacob peeked around the corner, sensing the tension. I stood firm in the doorway. "Margaret." Her eyes flicked to me, cold and sharp. "Martha. Still here, I see." "I live here," I replied evenly. "Of course I'm here." She gave a thin smile. "Yes, well, that much is obvious." Her gaze slid past me again. "Delilah. We need to talk." Delilah stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Mother." "No excuses," Margaret cut her off. "I raised you better than this. Do you have any idea what people are saying? That my daughter is living in," she glanced around, her nose wrinkling, "this shack. With a man who can't keep a job." Ethan's fists clenched, but he stayed silent. Jacob, wide-eyed, whispered, "Grandma, who is that lady?" I bent down and touched his shoulder gently. "Someone who doesn't understand kindness, sweetheart. Go back to your room." He hesitated, then obeyed, his little footsteps fading down the hall. Margaret turned her glare back on Delilah. "You're coming with me. You and Jacob. I've already prepared a room for you both. You don't belong here." My breath caught. She wasn't even including Ethan. Delilah's lips trembled. "Mother, please." "No." Margaret's voice was final, cutting through the air like a blade. "This is not a request. You've humiliated me long enough. I won't have my daughter raising my grandson in poverty, surrounded by—" She paused, her eyes flicking over me like I was nothing more than dirt on her shoe. "This." Something inside me snapped. "Margaret," I said, my voice steady but strong, "you have no right to walk into my home and insult it. Or me. Or my family." "Family?" She scoffed. "You call this family? A failed son, a broken marriage, and a child trapped in the middle? Don't lecture me about family, Martha. I've given my daughter everything: private schools, vacations, a life you couldn't even imagine. And yet, I replied quietly, she's standing in my house. Not yours. The silence that followed was thick. Delilah's eyes welled with tears, Ethan's chest rose and fell like a storm, and Margaret's face twisted with rage. You'll regret this, she hissed. Delilah, if you stay here, you're throwing away everything. Your future. Jacob's future. Think about what you're choosing. Delilah's hands shook. For a moment, I thought she might give in. I saw the war in her eyes, the pull of comfort and wealth against the raw, messy love that filled this old house. Then Ethan spoke. No, he said firmly, his voice low but steady. She's not choosing between you and me. She's choosing between lies and truth. Between appearances and real life. And I won't let you take my son away because you think money is more important than love. It was the first time I had heard him speak like that. Like a man, not a boy drowning in his own pride. Margaret's face turned scarlet. You ungrateful little. Stop. Delilah's voice cut through the room, trembling but clear. Mother, stop. We all froze. Delilah's eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at her mother. You raised me to believe I was better than everyone else. That love was measured in money. But look where that's gotten me. Broken. Humiliated. Miserable. And it's not because of Ethan. It's because I believed you. Margaret's mouth opened, then shut again. Delilah's voice shook. I love Jacob. And he doesn't need marble floors or maids or trust funds. He needs us. He needs peace. He needs a family that doesn't fall apart every time life gets hard. And if that means staying here, in this little house, then so be it. Margaret looked as if she'd been slapped. Delilah. No, Delilah said, firmer now. I'm not leaving. Not with you. Not without Ethan. This is my family. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Margaret spun on her heel, her heels clicking angrily against the porch. You'll regret this, she hissed again, before storming into the night. The screen door slammed. The sound echoed through the house. For a long time, no one moved. Then Ethan stepped forward, wrapping his arms around Delilah. She collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. For the first time, I didn't see them as enemies or strangers. I saw two broken people trying to build something new. Something fragile. Something worth saving. Jacob peeked out from his room, his eyes wide. Is she gone? I smiled weakly. She's gone, sweetheart. He ran into Delilah's arms, clinging to her. Ethan held them both, his eyes meeting mine over Jacob's head. For once, there was no anger there. Only gratitude. But as I sat there, watching them cling to one another, I knew the story wasn't over. Because Margaret Clark was not the kind of woman to accept defeat quietly. And I had a feeling the storm she would bring next would make every battle before feel like a summer breeze. The final storm came on a Sunday afternoon. The kind where the sky is heavy, gray, and pressing down on you, even before the rain starts. I had just finished pulling a pie out of the oven when I heard the sound. Tires crunching against gravel. A car door slamming shut. And then the unmistakable rhythm of heels on my porch. Margaret Clark. She didn't bother knocking this time. She flung the screen door open as if she owned the hinges. Behind her stood a tall man in a suit. Her lawyer, I guessed, and two police officers. Delilah froze at the table, her fork clattering against the plate. Ethan was in the yard, but he appeared at the door within seconds, sweat on his brow from chopping wood. Jacob peeked from behind the couch, clutching his teddy bear. Margaret's voice was cold and sharp. I warned you. You had a chance to leave gracefully. But now, you've left me no choice. I'm taking Jacob. He belongs with stability. With money. Not in this, she waved her hand around my kitchen, her face twisting. Filth. Delilah gasped, her face pale. Mother, no. Margaret cut her off. It's already in motion. I've filed for temporary custody. These officers are here to confirm the environment he's being raised in. I felt my blood turn to ice. My knees trembled, but I forced myself to stand tall. You think you can take my grandson out of this house? I said, my voice low, steady. Margaret smirked. Watch me. The officers stepped forward, their eyes scanning the room. My heart thundered. I looked at Jacob, at his wide, terrified eyes. Then I looked at Ethan, my son, who had finally started to grow into the man he was meant to be. And Delilah, broken but choosing to stand with her family. This was it. The moment everything would break, or be rebuilt. I took a deep breath and stepped between Margaret and Jacob. You've spent your whole life trying to buy love, Margaret, I said, my voice carrying louder than I thought possible. You raised a daughter to believe she was only worthy if she was polished and perfect. You threw away your son-in-law when he stumbled. And now you want to rip a child away from the only people who truly love him because you're embarrassed. Her face hardened, but I didn't stop. Look around you. This house isn't perfect. The paint is peeling, the floor creaks, and the roof leaks when it rains. But it's a home. A real home. With laughter in the mornings, prayers at night, and meals. Humble meals, yes, that we share at the same table. Can you say the same about your mansion, Margaret? Can you say you've given your grandson more than money and marble floors? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. One of the officers glanced at the other. I pressed on, my voice trembling but strong. You say Jacob belongs with stability? Then look at him. I pointed at the little boy clutching his teddy bear, hiding behind the couch. He doesn't want your wealth. He doesn't even understand it. What he understands is love, safety, family. And if you rip him from this house, you're not saving him, you're destroying him. Tears blurred my vision, but I let them fall. I may be an old woman. I may not have money or power. But I have something you'll never have, Margaret. I have the strength of a mother who gave everything. I have the love of a grandmother who will not let her family be torn apart again. And I swear, as long as there's breath in my body, you will not take this child from me. The room went still. Margaret's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her face flushed red, her hands trembling. The lawyer cleared his throat, clearly rattled. One of the officers spoke at last. Ma'am, he said carefully, there's no cause here to remove the child. The boy looks healthy, cared for and safe. Custody battles happen in court, not kitchens. We're leaving. And just like that, the storm shifted. Margaret's eyes blazed with fury, but the power had slipped from her grasp. She turned on Delilah, her voice like venom. You'll regret this. You'll regret choosing them over me. Delilah stood, her hands trembling but her chin high. No, mother. I regret nothing. For once in my life, I'm choosing love over fear. Family over money. And Jacob deserves that more than anything. Margaret stared at her, speechless. Then, with a furious huff, she spun on her heels and stormed out, her lawyer scrambling after her. The officers tipped their hats politely before following, the screen door banging shut behind them. Silence fell, thick and heavy. Then Jacob ran into my arms, burying his face in my chest. Grandma, he whispered, I don't want to go with her. I want to stay here. With you. I kissed the top of his head, holding him tight. You're safe, sweetheart. You're safe. Ethan sank into a chair, his hands covering his face. Delilah collapsed beside him, their shoulders touching, their breaths shaky but in unison. For the first time, I saw them not as enemies, but as survivors. As a family. That night, after Jacob had fallen asleep, Ethan came to me on the porch. His eyes were red, his voice raw. Mom, he whispered, I was wrong. About everything. About you. About what matters. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm asking for it anyway. I reached out, taking his hand. Ethan, forgiveness isn't earned. It's given. And you've always had mine. His tears fell freely then, the boy in him colliding with the man he was becoming. Delilah joined us a moment later, her face pale but her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. Martha, she said quietly, I never thought I'd say this, but thank you. For protecting Jacob. For protecting me. I looked at her, really looked at her. Not as the woman who had once smirked on my porch, but as a daughter-in-law who had been just as lost as my son. "You're welcome, Delilah. But this isn't just my fight. It's all of ours now." The three of us sat in silence, the crickets singing around us, the air cooler after the storm. And in that moment, I realized something. This house, this poor house they once mocked, was no longer just mine. It was ours. A place of broken people learning to heal, of love stitched together from frayed edges, of second chances. The world might still judge us. Margaret might still come back. Life would still throw storms our way. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. Because I wasn't alone. And sometimes, winning doesn't look like revenge. It looks like survival. It looks like love. It looks like opening your door again and again, even when it hurts, until finally, the ones who left come back not with pride, but with humility. That was my victory. My quiet, powerful victory. And as I sat on that porch with my son and daughter-in-law beside me, listening to the soft breaths of my grandson sleeping inside, I knew the truth. I hadn't just welcomed them home. I had won them back. My love. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.